Okay, so we'll just go ahead and get started with the presentation this evening. Do we have, I'll do the intro. Gary, our treasurer, N9UUR, will be doing a presentation on his rebuild of his Yeasu rotor, the G-800DXA. So I've seen, threads in, Power Talk and other IO groups, as well as QRZ, about rotor builds, and it always sounded very complicated. So now we're going to find out how simple it really is. Gary.
As Bill was saying in my introduction, yeah, if you ever wanted to see what the inside of a rotator looks like, this is your presentation. So let me do this. Okay, so we're going to talk about rebuilding a rotor. Had a rotor up on the tower for a long time, spinning my HF beam, and then it started acting squirrely. So I will define squirrely for you by showing you this. This is my high gain controller I use with the rotor, and it has on the right side 6 presets, as you can see here, and you can spin it left and right, but it shows you degrees of its heading. So if I spin it to the right here, it sort of says it's moving, and it sort of says it's moving, but it really comes up with the same heading again. So it's at 137, and we're going to go to the left. And I'm holding it for about a duration that would usually move at about 90 degrees. And so it was at 137, and now it's actually pointing to the right at 116. So I was moving it left, but it actually went right. I'm going to hit preset 4. This should send it to 58 degrees. And it actually is saying the motor has timed out. So there's something definitely wrong with this rotor. So first thing I did was set the rotor to a known position by eye, because the controller is not really reporting a position. I set the beam pointing due north from my house. And another thing you want to do is tie down the beam, because once you take the rotor away, you don't want your beam spinning in the breeze, winding your cables around the tower. So another thing I did is I had some forethought. Don't talk to Jean-Ann, but I do have forethought in that I left a real long coil of rotor cable up at the tower so that if ever I had to, I could bring the rotor down into the garage, and you see the end of the rotor cable there. So I can still go have Jean-Ann move it in the house, and I can, work with it. So the first thing you want to do is anticipate putting it back together, if you get that far. Mark the outside of the housing, the top and the bottom of the housing, because you need to have gears inside the rotor mesh properly when you're trying to put it back together. So after you have it marked, get a bin. You do not want to open a rotor on your workbench. You are about to release for a 800 DXA about 100 ball bearings, and they're going to go all over. So put it in a bin, or at least a tray or something, to contain the carnage that is about to ensue. Also, the inside of a rotor is very greasy. So some gloves are very helpful to have when working on the inside of a rotor. So here it is pulled apart. There's actually 2 races of 48 bearings each in a DXA 800. If I can do this, there we go. This is the rotor itself here. You can see here's the gear train coming out, which meshes to the gears around the inside of the top. These are two limit switches, and this arm moves around, presses on the limit switch to stop the rotor from going any further. This arm gets hit by this tang on the inside of the cap of the rotor. So when this comes all the way around, it pushes this, hits the micro switch, stops the rotor. So that's the end stops, left and right. But here's what we're interested in. This is a potentiometer driven by a gear off the top of the gear train. And that potentiometer is, I found to be the issue. It's obviously dirty or this or that. And I found that Yeasu uses a potentiometer with it's a plastic backing and then a carbon film or some sort of resistance coating and a wiper that goes around. And that's the pot. I have never seen a pot without a back before. And the actual wiper is this wire, which comes out and connects to the center. So it's not even internally connected. I've never seen such an animal. So no wonder moisture, dirt, whatever gets in there, and no wonder this pot is worthless. So what do I do now? I need to get a part. I don't know what I'm doing. Jinan says, well, just go get a new one. And as I always obey Jinan, I went and got a new one, put it up on the tower right away, and I'm back in business and on the air. However, I went and got a DX1000DXA to replace the 800DXA. And I was thinking, well, it's rated more torque, we'll take a bigger beam, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm wondering, well, what the heck is the difference? And so here's the DXA 800 on the right, and you'll notice here's the drive gear. And on the 1000 down here, kind of dark in the picture, is the drive gear. But there's another drive gear up here. So the 1000 has two drive gears, and the 800 has one drive gear. And here's the back of the top of the rotor as taken off. So here's the drive gear again from the 800. And you'll notice there's a drive gear, and here's the, this pulley is the one that drives the potentiometer. But you'll notice there's another shaft over here on the left. It's already built and ready for that second gear. Same part. So I went and got the technical manual. And you'll notice here on the top, it says technical manual for 800 and 1000. And all the parts in the parts diagram are exactly the same, except for this little area right here, which we'll zoom in on. Here's the 1000 DXA, 2 gears, and they're number 26 gears. And here's the 800 DXA, 1 gear. And it's, if you look at the part number after the diagram, it's a 26 here and a 28 there, but it's the same part number. So I'm wondering, wow, that's $110 difference between the two rotors for one extra gear. Anyway, back to our story. So I have to replace this pot. So I was on a quest for, well, I need a 500 linear ohm pot, linear as opposed to an audio taper pot. And I had a few close, I was there. And these are still carbon film pots I had laying around. Didn't know what they're from, how old they are. So at least the pots I had were, a sealed back. It's a sealed pot at least. So these are all carbon film. So the carbon film pot, 3 connectors and a dial goes around carbon surface. There's another kind of pot, which is called wire wound. And a wire wound pot, actually, instead of having a carbon film around, is actually windings of wire all the way around. And then the wiper goes around and, picks off that resistance. Now, it's maybe a little less steps accurate because this is A carbon film is a continuous paste. This is, depending on how close the windings are, how step accurate is it going to be between the windings. But I like wire wound. So we went and found a sealed wire wound 500 ohm linear pot from N9UUR and ordered it up, and there she is. So the first thing you really want to do is check the ohm readings on the old pot, so you know where it's. Remember, we set the beam to 0 north. You want to set the pot to a known resistance so you can set the new one to that same resistance, so the controller knows about where you are. So we also find this interesting. This leads across the entire pot. I get 517 ohms. This is from the left end to the center wiper, I get 518. And this is from the center wiper to the other end, and I get 7 more ohms. So across the entire device, I get 517 ohms, but to the center wiper, I have 518. And from the wiper to the other end, I have 7 more. So I have 524 ohms on a 517 ohm. Yeah, this pot is no good. So I set the new pot roughly where I thought it should be. And take note of the colors that are connected to your pot, so you connect the wires to the right place later on. And 2 simple screws release the pot assembly from the rotor, and you tear it down and clean it up. One problem, however, which wasn't really a problem, is the diameter of the threads on the old pot and the diameter of the shaft of the old pot were slightly smaller than the diameter of my new pot and the shaft on the new pot. So a couple of minutes later with a drill out the assembly and drill out the gear, and no problems. Here we go. Put it back together and make sure you have the right clearances and stuff, and clean the ball bearings. That's kind of do it 2 or 3 times until your super clean comes back clear, and then grease it all up and start putting ball bearings back in the race one at a time, and then they fall in the bottom and your hands get all greasy and it's horrible. And there's a better way. It's called the cow magnet. The ball bearings are magnetic, or they're metal, steel. So I found my daddy's old cow magnet in my toolbox. And you can pick up 6 or 8 ball bearings at a time, lay them down in the race, and then knock them off with your finger, and they don't roll around and they don't escape, and all your ball bearings are done. Then put the top on and match it up to your mark, and make sure the gears are meshing properly, and wiggle the top a bit, lock it up, and then you find that the DC motor has failed in your rotor. And when I tore it apart to test this part, actual smoke came out of the motor. So this meant not just to take the top off and look at the pot. This is a full, complete tear down. So this is the whole gear set out of the bottom. And then the bottom comes off. And over on this side, this is the motor gear coming through the top. So we take it apart. Here's the old motor coming out. As long as I got it out, it's time to clear the gears. Now, the gears, there are multiple gears in here. And I heavily encourage you to get out your cell phone camera or whatever and start taking pictures. Because all the gears are exactly the same size, and which one goes in which order on top of what. And each of the gears has little spacers built into them. So they average out, and you got 2 posts they're going to go on here. So take pictures. When I took it apart, I actually laid this out in order of which gear came off. So this is the last gear to come off. So putting it back together, Get out your grease everything up really good. Get the new motor from Yeasu, about $40. Wasn't too bad, I didn't think. And put it all together and test it again. And this time it works perfectly well. And got the old controller out, calibrated to it. And we're going to retire this to be now our 6-meter field day rotor. Those of you who have been on field day have seen Jinan operating with the 6-meter beam up there. This is a much better rotor. We have a 450. I'm using it field day. So I'm going to retire the 450. Maybe I'll bring it for auction. So yeah, I've never seen a pot with an open back like this with the wiper blade with a wire soldered. It's like, wow. So I was so enamored with this little project that I went ahead and took the azimuth elevation rotor. I'm a satellite operator. Took the azimuth elevation rotor 5400 off the roof of my house, rebuilt that with the new pots sealed, and put it back on the roof. So I'm like done with this pot thing from Yeasu. And that's it. Any questions? So this is just a rundown of set the rotor make a known direction, mark the housing, measure your old pot, set your new pot to that resistance, grease and clean everything, replace the balls, button it up and test, and then recalibrate your rotor.
Find the motor from Yeasu. Were all the other parts available too? Gears, things like that?
I believe so. I believe so. I didn't ask her about it, but I just sent an email to Yeasu Parts, so you can find that on their webpage, and said, I've got this rotor, and I was able to read the part number off the old motor. So I sent her I have a G-800. Here's the part number of the motor. Can I get a new one? And within like 10, 12 hours, she's like, yeah, here's your invoice. It costs this much. Done.
Are they still production or still current production? And how old are the ones you have?
They are still currently in production. The 800, the 1000, and the 2800, which is a physically bigger rotor. I don't know about the 450 if they make that anymore. But my 800 is only like 4 years old. So it's not that old.
Yes, and I have an old Yeasu elevation rotor, and the control box, one of the switches broke. So you're saying if I contact, and did you call them on a phone? From
email.
Just email them, and they got back to you. I don't know a part number. Can you find the manuals online so you can give them a part number?
That would be the best. If
But
you
then-
can find the manual for that controller.
Yeah. Well,
Actually, our 4500, the field day rotor we have been using,
yes.
gets packed away in bins, you
Right.
know. And one time we were going to field day, Jinan, remember, and one of the buttons had broken off the front of the controller.
Yeah.
So we
those
had
little
to,
tab things, they snap
yeah.
real easily.
So we had to innovate, be creative with a momentary contact switch soldered into the board for field day. We got it to work.
Okay.
Anyway, but I was able to contact Yeasu, and I got that button for that
So
control.
you can directly order parts from Yeasu for these rotors if
Yeah.
they're not super old. Okay.
Jinan?
Hey, Gary, I was just curious if you bought the extra gears and made your 800 to 1000.
I did all that research after I ordered the motor. And I'm like, yeah, I should have.
Yeah, because I bet those gears weren't terribly expensive. They're plastic, right?
Probably, no, they're all metal.
They're metal.
It's all metal.
Oh.
The only plastic in that rotor is the top two that go to the potentiometer.
Another source of parts and repair, actually. I'm trying to remember Phil's last name. Does somebody here remember him? Huh? Oh, he won't? Yeah. Well, that's interesting because I know I have a couple of rotors that, well, I didn't put mine in a pan when I took it apart. So I called Phil for some ball bearings and he sold me a whole bag full of ball bearings. I don't know where they are now. But anyway, Phil rebuilds rotors, apparently not Yeasu's. What's this called again? N-A-W, no.
Any other questions? Okay, we've got one more in the room. And then we'll hand it over to you, Bill, for Zoom attendees.
Not a question so much as a comment, but if you're tearing something like that down, anything actually, and it's got those loose ball bearings in there, and the mystical magical parts fairy comes and steals one on you, bounces on the floor or something, take a sample and go to a local bicycle shop. Bicycles are full of those things and they're all different sizes. They're all metric. And that is a great source to get one or two of those balls without having to wait a whole week for them to come through the mail.
Very good.
Are there any questions on Zoom? Raise your hand.
I think the presentation was very well done. I don't have a question. I just enjoyed it very much. Thanks.